changes. So instead of me starting at 12:15, Dr. Jennifer Vrije will speak, as I spoke yesterday. There's also a change towards the end of the program. We had scheduled a discussion and closure at 4:45. There will be a short break, 15 minutes, at 4:45, and then at 5 there will be the short paper sessions that were scheduled for tomorrow. So at 5, the final session, short paper session. And there won't be any tomorrow. Well, at least there will be a tomorrow, but not not for the conference, right? All right, that's the idea. So maybe someone can also type it in the chat for anyone who missed the change in the program. All right, then next, it is a pleasure and honor for me to introduce our first speaker of today, Dr. Katrin Gulden Le Maire. She is both a management consultant and a researcher, a fascinating combination that we don't see often in academia. She got her PhD from the University of Middlesex on the effects of the educational political developments of on the work of Wolfhard Pannenberg, particularly his theology and philosophy of science in the 1970s. She has numerous interests nowadays, and among them are epistemology and irrationality, theology and its basis in philosophy, or the philosophical basis of theology, and also public theology. So a couple of different things, really. And in addition to that, she has done tremendous work on the cognitive and neuroscientific influence of social media on younger people, and also the ramifications of that for democratic society. And she also ran a consultancy from Frankfurt between 2007 and 2017. And today she's going to speak on the future of theology, an epistemological vacuum. As I said, it's a pleasure and honor to have you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning or good afternoon to everybody. I would just like to ask, I see some people have entered the waiting room. I can't let them in. Are they in? Is that because I only see you, Rick?
You do not need to let them in.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you for this very kind introduction. I assume everybody can see my presentation and sees me like a small window. Yes, I do have 20 years experience as a consultant, and moreover in strategy and communications. And I think that's very important to remember when I speak today, because I haven't grown up in the academy. So I speak to you as somebody who has a different perspective and comes from a different system, okay? I'm looking from the outside in rather than from the inside out. I have chiefly experience in finance. So I will borrow some economic terms today. And you mentioned a lot of interest, but really at the moment, my focus is more on developing a cyber ethic. So I'm more in that and a framework for companies. So let me start. You might totally disagree with me. I'm very happy to discuss it because it's a very disputable headline. And I like starting my presentations with pictures. They're good for our brains. We're all zoomed out after 2 years. And I think if you just take away one thing, you can take away the picture, because this is how I regard my subject or the subject I'm speaking about, epistemology and methodology within the overall academy. It's the elephant in the room, okay? It's a niche topic, even if it's hotly debated within the niche. And of course, the elephant in the room is a popular metaphor for an obvious issue that for various reasons is not discussed, but we will do so today. So moving on, my introduction is, I liked your invitation, okay? Thank you very much to have a seminar about the future of theology and to say that there is no progress, or potentially stating it, that there is no progress in theology, because it's a statement that of course is open to various interpretations, you know, and a theological response, in my opinion, at least a Protestant one, might actually be part of the problem. And why? Because I will look at the wider significance of the subject of epistemology and methodology and the relevance of the progress of theology as a university discipline. Why is it a problem? Have we acknowledged it or have we not? So overall, we Protestants remain quite ambiguous and divided at this methodological level. You know, we have, in fact, we are faced with a methodological pluralism that is based on various philosophical programs over the last 40 years. You know, people refer to Popper, Kuhn, Lakatos, McIntyre. We are not unanimous in our response. You know, we have no basic common definition whether theology is an ecclesial science, a faith science, the science of God, or a scientific theology, or maybe even further definitions, okay? It remains also a niche specialist topic. So we lack, overall, the academy lacks a larger interest in the subject. But I think it's important, the subject, in order to evaluate any future or progress of theology. And last but not least, we have a totally fragmented academy. So we have huge challenges that we're facing. So I think what we first need is a working definition of what theology is in order to assess its progress. And second, we need to evaluate whether the context of how we've been doing epistemology and methodology is sufficient. You know, are our theories efficient? You know, what are the real life effects on how our scientificity of theology, so the quality of being scientific, is perceived? Has our place in the university system, the place of the academy, has it changed among the sciences? Has it improved? Has it declined? You know, so there are a lot of issues at stake, and many are larger than we might actually realize in our scientific, current, contemporary and historical scientific debates. So overall, at the moment, we have a very dominant that is shaped by the Anglo-Saxon Academy, a dominant perception that the subject of methodology, that epistemology, is done and conducted within an interdisciplinary context, okay, in relation to other sciences and especially the natural sciences. So that's in itself a rather confined discussion. Yet it has been also already recognized outside the academy, within all the sciences, the natural sciences, that the subject of epistemology in science communication, for example, within the natural science, is actually much larger. It's not confined to an inter-scientific exchange. So therefore, I would like to propose and discuss with you today a change of theological focus, something that we actually might not be really comfortable with, you know. And I would invite you now to look with me at the subject from an intersystemic perspective, okay? And so when we as theologians argue and speak about epistemology and methodology, we look at and really argue one model against another, okay, and the validity. But I would like to look at a sort of intersystemic multipolarity, okay, which has sort of influence on the science-making process. And that is within theology not considered. So it's an outside-in perspective because it's larger, okay? Polarity is actually a term that is used within political relations, and it refers to the nature of a system, okay? It regards elements within systems that shape systems. So science, we have science as one system, we have the academy as a subsystem, we have politics, we have business, we have numerous systems. And methodology, I think, transcends our system and our theological and interdisciplinary discourse, okay? And it can be determined by a variety of factors, and it can determine a variety of factors. And these can be internalistic or externalistic, okay? And those two terms are actually they're from economics, okay? And I will borrow those because in an internality is a non-identified cost or benefit, okay? So we lack awareness of it. And an externality is an indirect benefit or cost to a third party. And I think that is why we should, our process of Erkenntnisbemühung, as we say in Germany, also our epistemological process, in my opinion, should be widened to include at least awareness of some internalities and externalities, okay? We know from history, we know that Thomas Kuhn, he really brought in the concept of a paradigm shift, you know, the change in concepts of the scientific discipline. He argued for the bond between the science's basic commitment and theorizing in scientific reflection. And I'm sure many of you are much better and more in depth informed than I am. Years later, we have Wenzel van Huysten, for example, who criticizes among theologians, or especially in Wolfhard Pannenberg, for example, the lack of recognition of the faith commitment, because of course Pannenberg really tried to do a very objective exercise. And but he remained sort of confined and located issues on a philosophical basis, okay? But over and above the faith commitment of a theologian, there are larger developments that affect the way we do theology, okay? And I acknowledge them now. And we don't do that at the moment in the academy. And I actually don't know why, because maybe they are just too uncomfortable, maybe they're not of interest, or they are simply out of the pursuit of many theological and philosophical reflections. But they are recognized by scientists in other disciplines, okay? And we can evaluate their relevance and their effects for our knowledge creation. It's actually, in my opinion, essential for the progress and future in theology, okay? And some of those aspects includes asking by whom or what these developments are initiated. What is their relationship to theology, their correlation, their causality, their coherence? What is their legitimacy, okay? And when, you know, and they impact any research on methodology. So what I want to do is I want to take stock. I want to see where are we now at the moment. And in the Continental European Academy, I see that I think people are dialing in also from other continents. But in Germany and the Continental European Academy, we are in a crisis, okay? Some might argue this has been for the last 40 years. You know, many will argue it's been going on for much longer, okay? Second, and I think maybe we are not so much aware of it, sciences overall are in a crisis, okay? That's a newer development. And third, science communication faces a crisis. So why is that? And let me take you through some of those developments. So this is a short list of internalities and externalities, okay? These are for our generation. And when I say our generation, I mean now, and people in the academy now. We have 3 generations right now in the academies, okay? That's very important. We have boomers, we have Generation X. I'm sort of the tail end of Generation X. We have millennials, and we have Generation Z coming in. So we have an intergenerational challenges we have to deal with. And they impact our 4 generations so those issues to a very different degree. And they will also impact our theologies differently, okay? And whether we are aware of it or not. So we have an historical heritage in Germany, at least, that is larger than just an interdisciplinary discussion. You know, we have a history going back up to Kant and Schleiermacher, von Harnack, Pannenberg. They are some of the prominent ones. They were actually set and discussed epistemological and methodological issues within a science political environment. Okay, we had university reforms going on at various times in history. For example, when Schleiermacher was there, we had in 1810, for example, the Humboldtian reform. Yeah, Humboldt. We had with Pannenberg in the 70s, we had strong reforms. Okay, this is not actually calculated or even regarded when people read his book Wissenschaftstheorie and Theologie und Theologie. Yeah? And they basically don't consider that in the 70s, Pannenberg was faced with the ongoing start of the economization of the academy, and that there were numerous external events that actually affected his scientific research and thinking. You know, we had student unrests. He started in Munich at the LMU. He couldn't do the inauguration. They were disrupted. The student unrests, they resulted in university reforms. In the wider society, we had terrorist attacks from the RAF. We had the Cold War. We had the oil crisis. We had high unemployment, industrial strikes. You know, we had the end of the Bretton Woods Agreement. So there are lots and lots of elements that actually play into the overall context in which, for example, Pannenberg, all these guys conducted their theology. And that's a heritage of the German Academy. And they allude in their different publications, actually, they voice an awareness, okay? They were not speaking into an interdisciplinary context, but into a science, political, intersystemic context. And Schleiermacher, for example, they were also involved in creating university reforms. We have then other externalities and internalities. Financially, for example, in Germany, and that's true for most of the continental European academy, education is regarded as a public common good. It's very important to remember, okay? It's founded on the right to education and on the Declaration of Human Rights. It's implicit in our foundational law. So university education is thus predominantly free of fees. And by that, I mean, there might be low semester fees going into the hundreds, but there are not the thousands of euros and dollars that are expended in the Anglo-Saxon Academy. And theological faculties at state university are fully subsidized, okay? And while universities that are ecclesially managed receive up to 40% of their funding from the state. It's worthwhile to remember that Germany's education, while we do that, is below. We are highly modern and rich country, but our education budget overall remains below the OECD average. So let's remember, and to remember that. In contrast, the UK, just as in the US, the concept of education is a very different one, okay? Education is a private purchasable commodity, okay? Bursary and grants, when I studied in the UK, they were negligible, okay? A lot of students leave higher education, in many cases, with substantial debt. Third, we have judicial implications and internalities that also affect the academy, of course. Scientific freedom overall is a foundational right in Germany's foundational law and in the Rights Charter of the European Union. But we have no absolute security for the existence of theological faculties at university level, okay? We have a limping separation in Germany. We do not have a state church, for example, like Denmark, okay? We have a limping separation where the state fulfills some of the functions on behalf of the church, for example, collecting taxes. And we have state-church contracts in regards to education. These are criticized strongly, and they perceived often as threatening the state's supposed neutrality in regards to religion, okay? We have an overriding complexity that is social in the sense that European law now overrides German law. While we have scientific freedom, we have a lot of anti-discrimination guidelines that are coming into in our generation into the play at the academy. You know, in employment, potentially there are potential threats and externalities. Okay, and then we have, of course, critics who, and that's been going on for decades, refer to the perceived vocationality of the discipline and the, you know, that it simply just educates and trains clergy. We have furthermore, on this side, on science political considerations, okay, to what Pannenberg, he was deeply troubled. You see that in the foreword and in between the lines, that the economization of the continental European university system started in the 70s, okay? This has been completed. We had the 1999 Bologna reforms, okay, that led to the abolition of the traditional German university diploma in favor of bachelor and master's programs. And it was the largest university reform since Humboldt in 1810. It's very important to remember, okay? It drove forward a harmonization of European standards, and it increasingly also separated research and teaching, and led to overall, this is overall, it led to a decrease in foundational research and an increasing school-like teaching. We call that Verschulung, okay, in German. And so we had that in continental Europe. And in contrast, though, it's very interesting is that the Anglo-Saxon system is still rooted in a categorization that actually goes back to the 6th century and the Middle Ages by Cassio with the Artes Liberales. Okay, in Germany, we have the Scientific Council. I'm sure that you have that in other countries, in your countries as well. But they advise the government, who, remember, finances the academy. Okay, and in 2010, also in agreement with the Council of Europe, the Europarat, and the German Rectors Conference, they re-evaluated theology as a university science. And they came to the conclusion in 2010 that it remains a university discipline, okay? And they attest Christian theological subjects value for society. But they said they're mainly a cultural science. And what they did also, I think they realized that training, theological training, sort of serves also as a bulwark against, in a century where we witness a strong desecularization, okay? So they clarify it though, and they say it's going to be more a subjugated subject for the education of school teachers, which of course, that was 2010. There will be a next scientific council meeting, and we don't know what they will say then. There's actually no theologian, it's very interesting, there's no theologian on the board. Okay, there are lots of scientists from different disciplines, and you have somebody from Islamic studies on there, but theologians didn't manage to get on the board, and I don't know why. And finally, to look at continental European internalities for Protestant ones is we have a religious educational phenomenon right now going on at this time in our generation that, at least in Germany, we have had, and it's coming to an end, disproportionately large theological faculties, okay? Because we had a strong faculty from the boomer generation, okay? There is an ensuing retirement wave parallel going on amongst clergy, so that both, of course, the Protestant and the Catholic Church are in deep trouble. There is a huge employment gap, and there's the merger and closure of parishes going on. And if you look at it hypothetically, one says baby boomers, the last ones are born in 64, okay? Hypothetically, we have no baby boomer left in her or his post after 2029, okay? That's based on an average retirement age of 65 years. And that will have an effect on full-time theologians. There are very few very few students who actually want to become full-time theologians, because fewer and fewer students take theology as a Hauptfach, as a primary subject. Indeed, they actually study it, and the numbers, the intake remains constant, but they study it in view of becoming RE teachers. So I think that's about 70% of students. That's a large number. So, and we have a further issue is that actually a lot of students do not learn about methodology and epistemology. It's like a vacuum, as so to speak. Okay, I never learned about it in my undergraduate degree. Okay, so they are really unable to articulate, let alone defend the scientific foundation, the scientificity of their discipline. Whether that's in relation to another discipline or even further above. And I assume that they might even not consider it necessary as RE teachers, okay? And, but it's important to actually support the educational, political, legitimization of our discipline within a university context. So that was some of the externalities and internalities from the continental European Protestant perspective. The academy, of course, as I said, is set within a larger system called science. So moving on, let's look at some of those. And if you think these were a lot, the other ones are even bigger, okay? And they affect us in the academy to a varying degree, but they affect the overall sciences, okay? And they are 21st century phenomena. Some of them we have been coming on for a long time, you know, some we inherited. First, what we see overall in the sciences, and I think we see that strongly, is the emergence of technoscience, okay? This includes material science, genetic engineering, nanotechnology, and robotics, okay? Some argue that this is a continuation since the industrializations, engineering, and it's just moving forward. And I think others within those disciplines in their respective discussions call these epochal breaks and breakthroughs, okay? Second, we witness an acceleration of science progress that is due to technological developments and also to advances, for example, in the molecular science, okay? We have an unprecedented computational development through the creation of big data. And there's equally the emergence, and for me that is actually a new term. I've just learned about it. It's called convergence science, okay? And these are also referred to as the nano-bio-info-cogno, the NBIC paradigm. And it's in the sense that together those disciplines define a creative synergy shaping both the next stage of science and an advanced stage of the knowledge society. And that's discussed strongly by Nano. They refer to a branch of technology that deals with dimensions and tolerances in nanometers and less than 100 nanometers, and they go into the manipulation of individual atoms. When we refer to bio, this includes the exploitation of biological processes for industrial and other purposes, and genetic manipulation of microorganisms, okay, for the production of antibiotics and hormones. And I think, as we see in the COVID crisis, as far as I understand, for example, with a vaccine development, in molecular biology, this is called messenger ribonucleic acid vaccine. This falls under this category, okay? The info summarizes developments in the information technologies and with new quantum computing, and whereas Cogno includes the convergence of nano, bio, and IT for brain sciences, sensing, and mind control. So these are extraordinary developments, okay, we're facing overall. And I'm not discussing whether these are positive or negative, okay? They are within those disciplines, you have these discussions, but overall, I think it's important to retain, it changes fundamentally of how science overall is conducted. And I think one thing that is even not considered, and I haven't brought up, is the speed by which science is conducted, okay? And these convergent sciences, I think it's important to see is they don't just integrate knowledge and do research that is sort of spans over various disciplines. They focus also on societal needs, okay? It's research driven by specific and compelling problems. And I find that very important. We have, for example, Gluckman, Sir Peter Gluckman. He is a pediatrician and a medical scientist, and he's the former chief science advisor to New Zealand's prime ministers. He additionally also referred to a methodological shift in the natural science. Okay, I read that, I find that interesting. I don't know so much about it, okay? But we see that, so that's going on parallel outside of our academy. There is also, and he actually says, there is an increasing amount of science that is now framed within system thinking, okay? Which means that even the natural sciences move from certainty to probabilistic approaches, okay? So maybe that opens up some opportunities for the academy, Okay, I don't know. It's something that needs to be explored. And interestingly, Gluckman also holds that we are therefore overall, and he speaks from a natural scientist perspective, he moves, the natural sciences, he says, move from something which is called the normal to the post-normal sciences. And this, I think we need to, when we look at the academy, when we look at progress in theology, and when we look at epistemology and methodology, we see these huge issues, but we also see that the development and the programs we had since Philip Clayton, Nancy Murphy, Van Huysten, Alistair McGrath, they conducted and they explored their programs 20, 30 years ago. They were set in a totally different environment. So we have to reevaluate that. We have furthermore contemporary historical issues, and you know, they are huge, what we're going through. I'm sure every generation has huge issues, but we just see a third wave of globalization coming to an end. Okay, it started with the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the creation of the World Trade Union. China joined that in 2001. And parallel, of course, we have these accelerating technological developments. So this globalization has led, of course, to huge differences in connectivity, in migration, in mobility. Okay, the World Economic Forum, for example, speaks of a globalization 4.0, where we have new frontiers between the two superpowers, China and the US, and a lot is moved into cyberspace. Okay, we have a negative reverse trend of this globalization that also hits Western Europe. We have mass pollution, okay? We have generational pressures. We see that young people, the generation Greta, there are multi-systemic effects. People are going on the roads. They are on the streets. They are upset. We have a lot of things that are in flux. We have an economic inequality that is rising, and that leads to some social instability, okay? And in turn also to a political systemic fragility, and it's a test for Western democracies, okay? And we see that, for example, now with some of the politics concerning COVID and the restrictions. I think in all of our countries, people have been going on the road and on the streets and demonstrate, sometimes very violent. Okay, it's a very French thing, violent protests. And we have other issues like mass migration and then trade wars. So, and then overall we have effects of the digitalization and the technological developments that our generation is facing. And those have exacerbated and resulted in so-called post-truth regimes, okay? Since 2016, basically, since the Brexit, ahead of the Brexit and the then US election battle, we also have, in the last 5 years, there's been an influx and creation of research on the subject of post-truth, okay? And alongside this post-truth, as if it's not enough, we have a post-trust emergence with an overall low trust in many institutions, and among them the sciences. And I think that is a surprise, because of course the natural sciences were always considered as be reliable, okay? They had the superiority above some of the humanities, okay? And this is very visible in the COVID crisis, when overall the relationship between the sciences and society has changed, okay? And this has affected, and this has visualized itself in science communication since the COVID crisis, okay? This has multiplied, but often scientists who are excellent in their disciplines are not good communicators. So this has opened up other dialogues and disputes. And finally, I think that's the last one, is we have a 20th century that is very strongly marked by a desecularization. And there's some very negative effects. I think, for example, I work in finance. I know my industry has been, and I know overall my generation has been extremely affected by 9/11, okay, by the bombing of the Twin Towers. I think everybody in my generation and in my sector can remember where they were when it happened. I lost, for example, my job. We have other acts, Bataclan, 2015. Every country has now sort of religious terrorism. There's a lot of emotional religiosity, and simultaneously we have, and sometimes some people see that as a very positive development. I think that's open to discussion. We have an enormous industry of wellness and spiritual sector that is growing. Okay, that's McKinsey estimates that is $1.5 trillion large. So this is some of the larger environments we're looking at. I have another 3 aspects, and then I'm finished, and I think it's even not exhaustive. Okay, on the financial side, when I outlined the difference between the Anglo-Saxon education system and the German one, but moreover, we have now increasing privatization of research. Okay, so we don't have just systemic differences on a geographical level. We just have now companies and corporations such as Google or Meta, that's the former Facebook, Coca-Cola, lots of them, they have huge research budgets, okay? Meta, so Facebook, research budget is larger than that of Germany. That, of course, has a huge effect on the sciences overall as they're becoming privatized. You have sort of even a brain drain because we have lots of prominent scholars working for companies now. And that also, we witness this in certain sectors, like in the tech, consumer staples, and finance and materials, okay? That means also that scientific results are not merely privatized, but sometimes they're even tailor-made. We've seen that in some of the consumer staples in relation to sugar and food. And this is not a new thing, We had this, for example, in the Middle Ages with the bards and the singers. There's a German saying, "Das Brot ich esse, das Lied ich sing," that you actually adapt according to who finances you. And we look at the dissemination of scientific research. There's a science publishing industry that is not doing too well either, okay, where print is increasingly going out of favor. We are potentially faced with more and more algorithmic pre-selection of knowledge. And so where the dissemination of scientific research depends on platform selection, and that concerns also the digital preservation. So knowledge might actually become more restricted depending on who publishes it and who holds the rights. And then we have an overall judicial element that is more and political one. And I don't know whether that's positive or negative, but it's an ongoing issue, is that we have, that is pushed by the European Union, is the increasing growth of open science, Science 2.0, and citizen science, where we have, of course, other stakeholders coming into the scientific discussion. The EU has developed an open science policy and argues that this will lead to the further democratization of knowledge. And this makes sense from the point of the European Union, because, of course, the economization of the university system has been completed. We have a strong overall global competitivity. We have countries that invest, their education budgets are lower than that of states. So, they are changes. There are changes, and they add to the scientific conversation. And last but not least, we have overall some religious educational impacts, okay? We continue to witness a strong growth of Christianity in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and I added China, which of course is true, but which has its limitations. Denominationally, we see that Pentecostal and free evangelical groups and churches and theologies are growing, while in continental Europe, at least, the church affiliation continues to decline. But we still, like I outlined beforehand, we have a methodological pluralism and a continued fragmented academic discourse. We have churches in disarray and due to scandals and politics. And I mean, and I don't think we need to glee about it, because when we look at the Catholic Church, because we're all in the same boat in that sense, okay? From the outside, we are considered to be one academy. We have a continued loss of social license of Christianity in Europe. And social license involves early and continuous engagement with society at all levels. And it requires a deep understanding of underlying impacts on concerns. And do we have this deep understanding within the academy, you know, and because actually the contemporary methodological debate, which remains interdisciplinary, does not take into account all of those internalities and externalities. Okay, it still focuses on competing philosophical theories. Okay, and we know, like I just said, that the German debate historically voiced this awareness of a greater intersystemic implications that the subject held. And some of the theologians were involved actually on a science political level. And at the moment, we have this very strong Anglo-Saxon subject. So is there a way that we could introduce or reintegrate some of those larger outlined aspects that I just referred to? And I think there is. And I think it's an addendum, one could say, okay? There's a theory that was developed in the 1980s and 1990s that takes that takes external larger issues into consideration. It's actually not discussed in the academy, and it's called postnormal science. I think what I said in my quote, Gluckman referred to it. And I'm a bit wary to introduce another theory, because what I want to avoid is that a discussion at the end focuses again on the competition between those theories. You know, maybe we want to call it a layer, okay? Because then we fall back on going onto really micro issues and not integrate all that we face at the moment. So we have post-normal science, okay? So traditional epistemology debates were, if I say internalistic, it doesn't capture it quite, but they focused on the logical structures of theories, on hypotheses, on evidence, on the nature of explanation. We have Jerome Ravetz and Silvio Funtowitz, who are two philosophers of science, both are still alive, who developed post-normal science in 1983 and then in the 1990s. They did so in the context of environmental studies. Okay, that's very important to remember. And they questioned Kuhn's tradition-shattering complements to the tradition-bound activity of normal science, and they said it remains necessary what Kuhn does, but it's insufficient on its own. So post-normal science focuses on the quality of the epistemic process. It's a sort of intersystemic method that considers particular modes of scientific activity and surroundings where stakes are high and there are large systemic uncertainties and there are urgent decisions to make, and where's also values embedded in research creation. And solutions are evaluated on the effects that they have on broader communities. So they have a sort of multidimensional awareness. And they said that those traditional methodologies were to a certain extent inefficient and ineffective because they did not capture those system uncertainties and those decision stakes. So they actually, they have a graph. I didn't have space on my slide, sorry. But they basically look at they say there are the applied sciences, you have then professional consultancy that is there. And then they add as an overlay, so to speak, complementary post-normal science. So, and they estimated that the quality assurance of scientific inputs to the policy process requires an extended peer community, okay, consisting of all of those with a stake in the dialogue. So they widened this perspective, okay, and they try to also include the management of uncertainties, irreducible uncertainties, and they recognize different legitimate perspectives. It wasn't exclusive. And so I think that is, of course, quite very easy to say, to have an overlay like this when you have quantitative research, okay? This was done, this post-normal science is done a lot in technological, environmental, financial disciplines, and some critics interpret it from a shift to truth to quality. But I think it can be used, and it might actually be necessary for the effectiveness of science. So why have I been speaking of an epistemological vacuum? Okay, because I think this is on my last slide, I'm jumping a bit. Intradisciplinary epistemology is lacking in a lot of student curricula. It's a vacuum. Interdisciplinary, we have a methodological pluralism, which is confusing. So it creates a vacuum. Intersystemically, we have an unclear positioning of the whole academy and the scientificity of theology as external stakeholders. We are not clear what kind of science we are. So, and those discrepancies have real life impact, okay? We know that from history. We have, in Germany, we had the Historikerstreit, that was about, that had impact that is basically about the societal comprehension of the Holocaust guilt in the 1980s. And it was a methodological fight amongst historians. It had actually impact on society and their comprehension of societal guilt. We have, at the moment, we have the COVID crisis. Methodology has a real impact on how people understand danger, vaccinations, and all of this. And some are, you know, and so I think it's important. So I think when we look at the overall academy, we need to see, we have by the Scientific Council in Germany, we are obliged to do teaching and professional training. We do that. We do research activity and the generation of knowledge, but we have to also give service to and for society. And to do that, I think we have to look over and above some of our theories. And I would just ask, is there a tipping point for us actually in the academy? When you look at all the crises, all the disputes, is there anything where we maybe our own relevance becomes redundant, okay? In our reproaches, they don't answer some of the issues at stake. And until which point do normative questions stay normative when we are faced with some of those externalities? So in order, in my opinion, to have to really assess the progress and the future of theology, a clear definition of scientificity helps. I think we need to do that over and above the interdisciplinary discourse that's going on, or the discussion that's going on at the moment, on an intersystemic level. And I think that's recognized in other sciences, where they actually say, where they call for young scientists to be better prepared at university by training in the civic areas of science, such as the philosophy of science. That's very interesting. They call it a civic area, okay? And it's also, the question is it possible for us to do that? And is it possible to have maybe a preliminary agreed definition, a working model in order to continue? So, and that I think is, I would like to hear your voices on it. And I would encourage you to really look at it from this top-down external perspective and discuss this with me. We had we had some critics in the 60s, and then I stopped actually, such as William Bartley, you know, who actually accused the dialectic theologians of a retreat to commitment, and they refuse to engage in rational critique. And sometimes I ask myself whether we maybe have today a retreat from commitment, because to actually some biblical theological theologies, because we focus so much on rational and so much on the philosophy, you know. And I like very much, I work with Michael Welker. I'm a trustee on his board, and he said something which I find very interesting, and I will finish with that, is that theology cannot be properly done as a monologue or even a dialogue, but it always requires a rich and complex, a pluralistic and structured community of communities. And the conversations together form memories, and the memories together call for further conversation. And I think we can do that only if we have a robust, scientifically articulated self-conception and definition of our own discipline, because it allows us to position ourselves and to confront some of those external pressures and externalities and internalities. And because finally, a house divided by itself cannot stand. I think we see that in finance, we see that in business, we see that in other systems, okay? So thank you very much.
All right, let's put our hands together. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Gulden Le Maire, for your presentation.
Yeah.
I'm impressed with how much territory you've been able to cover in a single lecture.
Yeah, I'm scared by it myself.
Right, and I'm particularly glad that it adds a perspective that we haven't seen so far in the winter seminar. So thank you so much. There's some time for a Q&A. Let's see whether there's anyone either at home or in the room who would like to ask a question.
Okay, I will write down those questions, okay? And then at the same time, can you see me or can you see my slides?
I can
see
you now. Yeah.
Ah, yeah, you see me. Okay, perfect.
Let us see. Is there anyone in the room who has a question or anyone at home with a question? Yes, there's a mic.
Okay.
Gijsbert van den Brink. Yes, the floor is yours.
Hi, Katrin. This is Gijsbert van den Brink speaking. Thank you so much for your wide overview of all the kinds of systemic challenges with which theology is confronted in the current stage of history. I believe it's a tremendous enrichment to show from a helicopter view, as it were, what developments are taking place within which theology has to find its way. And some of these are very exciting. I wouldn't be negative about all of them, I believe, but overall the picture is quite discouraging, it seems. Not only, as you have shown, for theology, but also for the sciences. So that raises the question, if the sciences are in crisis as well, does it matter so much for theology to show that it's scientific after all? So that is one question. Yeah.
Does it matter for theology? I think it depends. It depends on your perspective. Do we all want to go down together? And what kind of future do you want to predict? I think it also, in my opinion, when I think about it, I think it depends also from what kind of denomination you are speaking, because clearly within the academy, we have some very flourishing theologies and denominations, and they would say it doesn't concern ourselves. But I think the question is, do we want to stay at a state university system where we are really within a dialogue within the overall sciences? That's a model that has been in continental Europe. Do we continue in the US and also in some of the Anglo-Saxon? We have a private model. We have seminaries that are financed differently. But I think, again, that calls into question what kind of scientific or what kind of theology do we want to conduct in the future? So I think, does it matter? Yes, it does matter, because at the end of the day, we are called to have, like the Scientific Council says, we have a service to and from society. Let's face it, theology in the last 100 years, we remain a cultural guiding force, but we don't really discuss it so much in the West anymore. But I think, so it matters. In my opinion, it matters. You might be, what do you think?